So as we approach the new UK tax year, I thought it was worthwhile just recording a short video to recap the changes that were announced in the October 2024 budget, particularly how that relates to UK resident non-domicile people, and also how it can advantage Brits who will return to the UK having spent lots of years living outside. So first of all, what is the current position in relation to UK resident non-domicile people, and what is the remittance basis of taxation? So this is what we have been using now for many years. It allows a non-UK national to move to the UK and non-dom to move to the UK, and for up to 15 years of living there, claim something called the remittance basis of taxation. As long as they leave their foreign income and their foreign gains outside of the UK shores, do not remit them into the UK, they do not need to declare that and pay tax on it in the UK. So it is essentially tax-free income and tax-free gains on non-UK assets for up to 15 years of living in the UK. This has not been available, of course, for UK nationals, only for non-DOMs who've been resident in the UK for up to that 15-year period. So that's being abolished. But in order to just soften the blow somewhat for those non-domicile people, the government's introducing something called the Temporary Repatriation Facility. This will come into effect from April the 6th, 2025, and it will allow anyone who has accumulated foreign income and accumulated foreign gains that have been claiming that remittance base of taxation. It will allow them to remit the money into the UK with a heavily reduced tax rate when they do so. So for the first tax year, which is 25-26, there's a flat rate of 12%. In the next tax year, there's also a flat rate of 12%. From 27-28 onwards, that will go to 15%. And then from 28-29, it would just be the normal marginal rate of taxation that they would pay if they were to remit that money into the UK. Now, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, did announce at the Economic Forum in Davos in January that they might look to tweak this somewhat. So the temporary repatriation facility might be extended. Maybe the rates could be reduced. Maybe the type of income and gains that have been rolled up might be slightly relaxed, such that more income and gains can indeed take advantage of this facility. We don't know the details of that yet, but that is what was announced at Davos. And the press heavily reported that she was just softening somewhat the approach for resident non-DOMs with a view to try and stop this mass exodus of wealthy people leaving the UK. There was a report that suggested that one millionaire every 45 minutes during the year of 2024 was actually leaving the UK. Now, whether that's as a result of the non-dom changes, who knows? But that was a report that came out in January this year. So what is it being replaced by? Well, it's being replaced by something called the Foreign Income and Gains, or the FIG regime. It's effective from April. We're moving away from a domicile system of taxation to a residency-based system of taxation, which is quite key because it now allows even British nationals who've been long-term non-resident in the UK to take advantage and claim the FIG rules. So it only applies to people who are new arrivals. You have to have been non-UK tax resident for 10 consecutive years. They're calling you a qualifying new resident when you return, having done 10 years as an expat, or indeed as a foreign national moving to the UK. It applies to everyone. It does have one small consequence, that in the years that you claim it, you aren't able to claim a personal income tax allowance or an annual exemption for capital gains tax. But it does allow you then to remit your global income and your global gains, your non-UK income and gains, into the UK and not pay any tax on it for a 4-year period for the first 4 tax years of moving to the UK. Big opportunity there for us as British expats who've been outside the UK for 10 or more years, consecutive years, to go back home and continue to claim that income tax and capital gains tax-free status. A little bit more of that in a slide or two's time. In relation to inheritance tax, we have a similar change. We're moving away from domicile to a residency-based system. What that basically means is if you have, over the last 20 years, spent less than 10 of those years UK tax resident, then you will not pay inheritance tax on your foreign assets. You will only pay tax on your UK-based assets. So in old speak, we had domicile people and non-domicile people. We will now have long-term residents and non-long-term resident people. And that will apply then to us British expats who are moving back to the UK. If we've done 10 years offshore, therefore we have less than 10 of the last 20 years UK resident, we'll be treated in the same way that non-DOMs were in the old regime. We will now be a non-long-term resident. So that will allow us then to move back to the UK, keep assets outside the UK. Portfolio bonds is a good example of that, of course. So you can move back to the UK with an Isle of Man or Dublin-based PPB, not in the UK. If you pass away within the first 10 years of living there, you're still a non-long-term resident. That will be inheritance tax-free. A little bit more of that also later. So it does introduce some planning opportunities then, not only for our foreign national clients who are going to go and live in the UK, but also for us Brits. So for the first 4 years of moving there, we could, for example, keep a property that we maybe used to live in overseas, and we could rent that out. We can generate rental yield. And then if we were to remit that into the UK, we won't pay tax there. Being mindful, we might be paying income tax in the country where that property is based, but in many countries around the world, that wouldn't be the case. Most of the Middle East, for example, would be tax-free income. We could also then potentially sell that property within the first 4 years of moving back, or maybe it's not a house that used to be our main residence. Maybe it's just a rental property that we have as an investment. We can sell it, realize those gains, and not pay tax in the UK for the first 4 years. Again, being mindful that you might be liable to tax on your in the country where that house is actually situated. Much more opportunity maybe with mutual funds though, because once you move into the UK for the first 4 years of living there, you could sell out of your mutual fund portfolio and not pay tax in the UK, but also not pay tax most likely in the country that you used to be resident, where you perhaps generated most of those gains. So really good opportunity here for returning Brits or foreign nationals moving to the UK to use that 4-year window to clean up the tax position of foreign assets. You also have a similar advantage, as we've already mentioned, with any assets liable to inheritance tax. You've got 10 years if you've done, out of the last 20 years, you've spent 10 of them outside of the UK. When you move back to the UK, you've got a further 10 years before you'll become liable to inheritance tax in most cases. Need to do the maths on that. In the last 20 years, have I been tax resident in 10 of those 20 years? If the answer is no, I do not pay inheritance tax on anything other than my UK situs assets. So I've mentioned mutual funds here. Are they in the UK or are they overseas? Are they generating income or are they generating gains? And that's quite important, because if they are generating an income and you have a UK-based mutual fund, you're not going to be able to claim the FIG rules. If you were to then sell those funds and generate a gain, it's a UK-based mutual fund, you won't be able to claim the FIG rules. So much better to have maybe a Europe-based, Dublin-based, Luxembourg-based, maybe mutual fund instead, because then that's a non-UK asset, and also you can then claim the FIG rules for the first 4 years of being there. Structured notes, similarly, most of the structured notes that we have on offer will be non-UK based, so that could generate a coupon, and for the first 4 years of living in the UK, that is not going to be liable to UK income taxes. Also, it is possible they might generate a capital gain, particularly if you have a structured note that's inside a portfolio bond. Perhaps too much detail for the purposes of this video, but often you take the note out of the portfolio bond before repatriating for fear of having a deemed gain on the PPB in the UK. So you can often remove those from the portfolio bond at a value below the maturity value, and then you would have a capital gain if they matured several years later, 2, 3, 4 years later. As a UK resident, you may have a capital gain on which you would pay tax, but not so if you're able to claim the FIG rules, and you do so within the first 4 years of living there, you can avoid the CGT. So avoiding tax on structured note coupons and on any capital gain is quite big for the first 4 years. As far as portfolio bonds are concerned, there was no changes in the budget of October 2024 at all. You're still getting gross roll-up. You're still able to claim the 5% tax-deferred withdrawals. You still get time apportionment relief. You can still choose the taxpayer by assigning all or some of the segments to someone else. And they are, of course, very, very easy and simple to hold in trust. I'll come on to that in a slide's time. The other major change from the budget is the proposal to introduce inheritance tax on pensions. That's effective from 2027, April the 6th. That will mainly affect defined contribution schemes, because obviously inheritance tax is liable on the day you pass away. If you have a defined benefit scheme, the payout from that is unlikely to be probably anything other than to a spouse where it's IHT free anyway. So this is going to affect defined contribution schemes only, really. It is a 40% inheritance tax liability now on your pension fund. So if you're liable to UK inheritance tax on your global estate, let's assume you are a long-term resident by the time you pass, then you are going to pay tax on your pensions globally. If you have a non-long-term resident status, you would only pay tax if you had a UK pension, not an overseas pension. Maybe an advantage there then for CUROPS. So the 40% liability will be on the entire pension fund, added together with the rest of your estate and liable to IHT in the UK. Really difficult to plan with pensions. If you have separate liquidity, maybe invest in a portfolio bond or other liquid assets, then you can wrap trusts around it. You can't wrap a trust around a UK pension because it's already essentially a trust. It's just nigh on impossible to IHT plan with. So that's quite a big change. And where we used to say to people, spend your non-UK pension money first because that's IHTable and use your pension as an IHT mitigation strategy, I think that's now reversed around. So we will probably look to spend the pension money first. I've mentioned SIPs and CUROPS already. QNUPs likewise would be a non-UK asset. But even though we used to use QNUPs as an IHT mitigation strategy, if you are a long-term resident at point of passing, then your QNUPs, your global assets, one of which is your QNUPs, just like a QROPS, will be liable to inheritance tax, assuming the rules are introduced in 2027 as proposed. So could there be an opportunity ahead of, maybe just ahead of retirement, to move to a tax efficient country? The UAE is a great example of that, much of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC as well. You could move to one of those countries, extract your pension if you're over the age of 55 in a tax-free environment, no income tax on a pension in those countries, and then perhaps move back to the UK. Could someone who's been a long-term non-resident of the UK, maybe living in Europe, maybe living in Asia, could they move to the Middle East short term before retirement, remove all of the value from their UK or indeed potentially a UK pension or potentially CUROPS, and then ultimately retire back to the UK with a portfolio bond, not inside a pension, maybe do some trust planning with it, and take advantage of the 5% withdrawals and growth roll-up, etc., that we're used to with PPB. So there could be some real good opportunities there for returning Brits who intend to retire in the UK. Just for completeness here, portfolio bonds as an Isle of Man or Dublin or Mauritius-based asset, that of course is a non-UK asset. So if you're a non-long-term resident and you have been for probably many years, over a decade at least, then when you go back to the UK, that portfolio bond is going to be inheritance tax-free, irrespective of whether it's in trust, for the first 10 years of living there until you become a long-term resident again. So not even really any need to trust plan with the portfolio bond. It's just naturally going to be IHT free, and you can draw down your 5%, and you're getting growth roll-up. And if you want to take more than that, you can assign segments to a spouse or an adult child or whoever, and essentially choose the taxpayer. So really good opportunities. It's made portfolio bonds even more tax efficient now than they were prior to these proposed changes. Whether or not you trust plan with it, I would suggest there is individual circumstances need to be taken into account. So when you move back to the UK, you could, as a non-long-term resident, British expat or indeed foreign national, you could wrap it into a discretionary trust, a settlor included discretionary trust, of which therefore you are a beneficiary if it's a settlor included discretionary trust. You can then continue to have access to that wealth over the next 10 years. If you pass away in 10 years, then it is an excluded property trust. It's in perpetuity going to be outside of pretty much probably anybody's estate for as long as the trust exists. Yet your spouse and your beneficiaries can continue to have access to that fund during their time as UK residents, probably long-term residents themselves, and it's completely inheritance tax when they pass away. If you don't want to use a trust, that's okay. But once you get to the UK and you've been there for, say, 9.5 years, you are about to become a long-term resident again, we need to do some planning. So maybe 9.5 years in, if we haven't already done the trust, we should look to use a discounted gift trust or something similar to do the normal IHT mitigation. So definitely some more opportunities now with trusts for returning Brits as well as for foreign nationals who are moving to the UK to make that home. Hope that's useful. Just a quick recap of what happened in this year's budget. As always, if you have any questions, please do reach out. Always here to help and get involved with client meetings and chat with you on client cases if you wish. Thanks very much indeed for watching today.